good, everyone? Hello, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome. Welcome, dear friends, and all who are interested in a new study, a new spiritual study, an in-depth one. The second part of what the mystics know. This is your pastor, Yeti. Today in our spirituality insight, I'm going to talk about God is found in imperfection. Why the journey matters. Suppose a superstar of knowledge moves into your house as a boarder. With 3 PhDs after his name, he sits at your supper table each evening, dispensing information about nuclear physics, cyberspace, and psychoneuroimmunology. Quite a word, right? Giving ultimate answers to every question you ask. He doesn't lead you through his thinking process, however, or even involve you in it. He simply states the conclusions he has reached. You might find his conclusions interesting and even very helpful, but the way he relates to you will not set you free, empower you, or make you feel good about yourself. His wisdom will not liberate you. It will not invite you to growth and life. Indeed, it will in the end make you feel inferior and dependent. That's exactly the way we have used Jesus. We have treated him like a person with 3 PhDs coming to tell us his conclusions. We humans don't really want conclusions. We want to experience the process. We want someone to walk with us through all the stages of our faith. We want someone to hold our hand, to love us, to support us, and to believe in us while we are in process. You and I are always in process. That's where we live our lives. That's what interests us. Even our faith is in process. The fact is, we're really not all that concerned about having perfect conclusions. We need someone to help us make sense of the journey itself. The wheat and the weeds. When the new wheat sprouted and then ripened, the darnel, the weeds, appeared as well. The owner's servants went to him and said, "Sir, was it not good seed that you sowed in your field? If so, where does the darnel come from?" Matthew 13:26-27. And that is always our question. Where do the weeds come from? We try to be good. We think we're Christian. Yet we have the most horrible thoughts. And we do things we do not understand. We hurt the very people we do not want to hurt. We know our own individual lives have brought their share of evil into this world. We feel guilty about that and were sorry. In this parable, we see that Jesus understands our struggle and inconsistency. Some enemy has done this, the owner answered. Immediately we want to blame it on someone else. So the servants ask, "Do you want us to go and weed it out?" And Jesus gives a most extraordinary answer. A very different one from what most moralists and confessors have given us. And Jesus says, "No, because when you weed out the weeds, you might pull up the wheat with it. Let them both grow until the harvest. In the harvest, I'll say to the reapers, separate the weeds and the wheat." We are unwilling, it seems, to leave any work for the reapers. We have spent most of our lives trying to do the job of separation ourselves, trying to figure out who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It's a waste of time, Jesus seems to say. Using evil for good. The key moral question is not, how can we get rid of evil? But rather, how can we use evil for good? How can we learn discernment so that we can say, yes, this is wheat and that is wheat, but they must both grow together to create life? That is the great moral question. That is the true challenge for spiritual guides. How to put together darkness and light. God is an earthquake. A Jewish master once said, God is not nice. God is not an uncle. God is an earthquake. We've created a bourgeois version of Christianity that has manufactured a nice God. We want Jesus finally to take away our insecurity. We want to feel as we are just wheat and not weeds. But God isn't nice, and God isn't an uncle. God is an earthquake. In the way the preaching of the gospel pulls the rug out from under us, we have to put our life on a new footing. I believe we've always thought that we could reason our way into the gospel, but we'll never solve the way to a new life in our heads. We have to live our way into a new kind of thinking. First, we have to act. Spirituality is starving in the midst of plenty. A whale-eyed pig is put into an aquarium. He is fed for some days with little minnows. Then in the middle of the experiment, a glass partition is placed down the middle of the aquarium so that the pike, I think it's the pike, not the pig, is now confined to one side. Then the researchers drop the minnows on the other side. Immediately the pike goes for the minnows, but he hits himself against the glass. He circles and hits his again. He tries a third time, but he is now hitting the glass a little less hard. After a few more times, he's just sort of nosing up against the glass. he has a feeling he's not going to get those minnows. Pretty soon he just swims around in circles and ignores the minnows on the other side. At that point, those doing the experiment take out the glass. The minnows come right up against the gills of the pike, and he doesn't even try to eat them. The experiment ends when the whale-eyed pike starves to death. He's convinced he's not going to get those minnows, so there's no point in wasting his time or hurting his nose again. That is the best image of cultural blindness I have heard. I wanted to weep when I first heard it, but I realized that the experiment is about human beings, not about fish. That's much of the human story, people spiritually starving in the midst of plenty. They don't know how to eat. Man guards his nothing. In Albuquerque, there is a sidewalk where the homeless often sit against the wall to catch the morning sun. And you can see graffiti clearly on the pavement. You can see how foolishly man guards his nothing, thereby keeping us out. And truly God is hated here. I can only guess at what kind of person wrote such wisdom, but I heard a paraphrase of Jesus in mind. Someone wrote his words on the sidewalk. I watch how foolishly man guards his nothing, thereby keeping us out. Truly God is hated here. I repeat this, that you have the chance also to write it down. The people of the sidewalk might well be at the center, and the people in their houses might well be on the circumference. Now I can probably assume that the street person is not formally educated in theology or trained in contemplative spirituality. Yet from the edge, this person has clearly understood all that I am trying to say. Did she go through healing? Did he pay for psychotherapy? How does this person so clearly recognize the false nature of our self-image and yet the clear sense of being included and excluded? The street person has both edges and essence and also knows exactly who God is. As we face our own inner Herods and Hitlers, we both recognize their disguises in others, and we learn a certain forgiveness that is necessary for ongoing political involvement. I am always a part of the problem. I can never really stand apart, above, or beyond human sinfulness. I am a part of the tragic sense of life, and there is no perfect orthodoxy on which to stand. Today there seems to be a breach in almost every wall. Some have said the cosmic egg that seemed to hold us together for a long time is now broken. All the king's horses and all the king's men find themselves unable to put it back together again. It feels as if the earth moved beneath us somewhere in the mid or late 60s. The old certitudes, the agreed upon assumptions, the core values of Western civilization came up for major questioning. Our presuppositions dissolved, and the questioning has not stopped for decades. We now find ourselves engaged in major and sometimes minor culture wars on almost every personal and social issue. It is all thinkable now, and most of us are beyond being shocked by anything. We are often sad, discouraged, and even alienated from the only world we have. It was so much easier to live inside the cosmic egg. It feels like exile from home, and it manifests in rampant abuse, violence, victim behavior, denial, social hysteria, or lifeboat addicts. Each enclave of security seems to be clutching at its small certitudes, defiant, assertive, and substituting opinions for deeper identity. We yearn for breach menders who can restore our ruined houses, as Isaiah says. We long for great soul people who can hold the chaos together within themselves, and gives us the courage to do the same. In mythology, this is the gift of the queen or the king. In religion, it is symbolized by the temple in Jerusalem or the cathedral at the center of the city. In the psychological world, we speak simply of mental and emotional health. In spirituality, we dare to long for God, but our condition instead is always one of exile. We are pilgrims and strangers on this earth. Law will always dominate people who have not experienced that the Spirit blows where it pleases and cannot be controlled by our righteousness. Law is the false promise for those who control life from their heads, those who are afraid to listen anew right now, those who substitute principles for prayer and people. There is no place better to hide than behind the tickets of the law. That is said by St. Thomas More, and he was a lawyer. Victory over sin is never total, but rather a victory over sin's power to overwhelm us or defeat us. The sacred signs in the form of stories, images, symbols, or dreams allow us to live with and walk with and through our sin to God. God's help does not readjust our false self or polish up our self-image. Instead, God shows us the depths of our emptiness and sin so that we have nothing more to shock or humiliate us. Liberalism creates suspicious people more than loving people. Political liberals begin by asking, who has the power here? Instead of, how can I serve here? Life is an issue to be informed about or fixed, but seldom a mystery to participate in, even in its broken state. This is probably the core difference between a mere liberal and a truly transformed individual. Liberals need to find that rare ability to live happily in a broken world and still work for its reform. It is a work of art that I believe only spirituality can achieve. Mere ideology is not sufficient to the task. Behind every cynic I meet, there was once a youthful idealist who could not make his ideas work outside of his head. Liberal seems incapable of being a part of a taint anything: food, institutions, histories, explanations, groups, churches, and most especially authority structures of any kind. Soon they themselves cannot lead or follow good leaders because they mistrust power and leadership itself. Yet history makes it clear that good leadership is necessary for real change. American liberalism, in my opinion, has no practical goal beyond maintaining personal and social freedom. I choose, therefore I am, might be its operational belief system. The problem for a peace movement is that you cannot build any new social structures or enduring constituencies within this belief system. Such movements deconstruct them within, as the highly opinionated individualists quickly come into conflict with one another's freedom to think. What they lack is a spiritual center, a reference point outside of the private I. We religious folks would say they lack God, especially a God who gives source, pattern, and external goal. As a result, we each become our own source, pattern, and goal. The first commandment was not accidentally the first, because if you don't have one God before you, you will always become your own God. For this reason, it is difficult to build anything cohesive or compiling among liberal people. There is no authority beyond individual opinion and recent research, and in fact, the very word authority is considered bad. Compare that to the true liberalism of a Martin Luther King or a Dorothy Day or a Cesar Chavez. They all had an authority beyond their own and a center outside of themselves. Our people are dying for lack of wisdom, for lack of transcendent meaning, to name their soul and their struggles. What good is inclusive language if no one is even listening to our message? Why would a young person join a group of 50-year-old complainers who are unwilling to speak of God and joy and peace beyond comprehension? There are the obsessive preoccupations of my generation who have had more freedom, change, our way of arranging the world than any generation in human history. Why are we unwilling to join in the cosmic dance that invites and thrills the would-be searchers? Why are so many of us deconstructed more than we are aware, afraid to kneel and adore what is? In the only lifetime we will ever have, don't we know, in the words of Anne Lamott, that 100 years from now it will be all new people? We must give them something good to build on. The word person comes from the Latin word for mask, or for the actor's part in a drama. The Judean Christian tradition would see all human personhood as a real and organic participation in the one personhood that is God. In other words, the human self has no meaning or substance apart from the selfhood of God. God's personhood is not a mask, but the face behind all masks. We are the masks of God, and we play out God's image in myriad human ways. The immense problem we are facing in a secular society is that we do not know who we are. That is that we don't know we are the masks of God. We are therefore condemned to creating our own significance, our own legitimations, our own mask and personhood. This makes us like atoms. And I think the word is more atoms, inheriting unstable. When we do not see our lives as a participation in another, we are forced to manufacture our own private significance. Contemporary psychology had to create a word for this, and again choose the Latin word for I, or ego. It is the atomized self, the small self, the false self, which does not really exist at all. In such a state of insecurity, it overdefends itself and overdefines itself. We call this the imperial ego, and it is the basic for all illusion and all evil. It is Adam and Eve trying to survive outside of the garden, and they can't. Begging seemed to create an ambience of respectful connection, vulnerability, and utter honesty. We are in this human thing together. We do not need to be afraid of one another. but we do need to reveal our nakedness and neediness to one another. That was my first lesson in the ancient culture of India. There appeared to be a much finer line between ego and shadow. Ego and shadow were not as separate and defended, but somehow seemed to be working up front and together. When ego and shadow are a little kinder to one another, it is the humble spirit that is released. Sin is not simply something we do, it is something we are. Sin is a distorted personalities people are trapped in. Sin is the illusionary lives that people live and the twisted motives that drive them. No one has ever thought them truth or meaning. So they live at a very low spiritual subsistence level. They are paralyzed. Isolated actions or omissions are much more the effects of sin rather than sin itself. As Dorothy Day once wisely said, what the gospel forever takes away from Christians is the right to judge between the worthy and the unworthy poor. When we sit in judgment like that, we stand aloof and apart. That's precisely the position the gospel does not allow a Christian, as if we could critique who is worthy and who is unworthy. Our criteria will always be cultural and too often self-interested. A person might be at fault to some degree, but poverty is primarily a psychological state to which one surrenders after repeatedly being put down. It's a state of oppression. After continually being assaulted by negative voices from within or without, finally we surrender to them. We can't stand against them. Soon we are so disadvantaged that we can't even recognize. Much like take advantage of the opportunities offered to us. The negative voices of culture shame soon become self-fulfilling prophecies. People who have never been in this downtrodden, impoverished situation can be very unsympathetic because they don't realize what's happening inside. From their secure position, usually in the middle or upper classes, it's easy to call the poor lazy or unmotivated. Such people do not understand the psychological dimension of poverty. The poor have little chance of chancing their state without some help from outside, some good news. This state is often characterized by what is called victim behavior. It's self-destructive and other-destructive, and it's characterized all oppressed people. Those who are not in such a state of oppression cannot understand their behavior. It doesn't fit their criteria. So they misjudge and misinterpret almost everything, the disadvantage too. Within behavior is predictable. Victim behavior is predictable. It is deadly, and it characterized much, of not most, of the human race in one form or another. We may all be thinking of some group other than ourselves, but every group finds itself in that state of oppression in relation to some other group. Trusting in God is not a passive dependency, a heading over the responsibilities. Okay, God, you can do it. Faith in God is primarily an active virtue. Faith does not necessarily mean an expectation that God will intervene. Faith is an end in itself. Faith is an active empowering of the other to be everything he or she can be for you. It calls forth in the other and in oneself what it sees. Some would simply call it the power of positive thinking or self-fulfilled trust. Those who are parents can probably relate to this definition. That little baby you were holding looked up at you with that total faith and expectation. That faith in you. You became a mother because the child made you into a mother. The child actively empowered you to be everything you could be for it. Between the years when your children were 1 and 6, you became capable of almost totally losing yourself in them. It's unbelievable what mothers go through, running constantly all day. Would you ever have thought you could lose yourself that way? You did it because you were the object of your child's fate. Only a child's fate in you and a child's need of you could bring the incredible power and dedication out of a human being. The fate of the blind man saying, "Jesus, I need you, I love you, I want you," becomes the channel of trust and openness through which the power of Jesus can flow to heal that person and change that person's life. This is one of the most central things about faith that I can say. It is a quality of relationship that works magic. Even with all the best intentions in the world, given our different temperaments, backgrounds, and the way we process our data and information, we are going to step on one another's toes. Two people with absolutely goodwill can deeply hurt one another. Good people hurt one another because we all come at reality in different ways. That's why for Jesus, the only way to achieve union is through forgiveness, not through making sin impossible. We might think that the only way to achieve union is to gather together a group of absolute good and healed people or excommunicated nonconformists. But the truth is deeper than that. Jesus says the only way to achieve union is through failure, vulnerability, and repair, because people are always going to hurt one another. I wish authors would write realistically about lives of the saints, so we'd know that until the day they died, they had been doing things at which you and I would be scandalized. No person in the Bible, not even Jesus and Mary, would pass the strange litmus test for holiness instituted later. The Bible presents real people who make real mistakes and work through them with God's help. For example, both Moses and Paul were known murderers. You are on the same forgiveness path as the saints. The same Spirit is at work freeing you. You are struggling with the same difficulties they had, and you are learning both to receive and grant a universal forgiveness. This is the sum and substance of Jesus' teaching. If you don't get forgiveness, you don't get the core message. For many people today, the concept of sin has become hard to understand. The very word stirs up resistance. The church doctrine of sin has often been used to intimidate people. Above all, the church sexual morality was for centuries presented in a way that led to 1,000 anxieties, repressions, and guilt feelings. This might suggest that we should just do without the word altogether, but that produces a vacuum that can't be filled in any other way. It is more meaningful to learn to understand the term in a new way. The Greek word for sin, hamartia, comes from the art of archery and actually means missing the mark. Sinning in this sense means going wide of the target. That was what Augustine had in mind when he said, "Seek what you are seeking, but don't seek it where you are seeking it." The German word for sin is Sünde. Contains the root sund, English sunder, which means cleft or separation. The word sin therefore means our separation from God, but also from our fellow human beings and from ourselves. Since our fixations that prevent the energy of life, God's love, from flowing freely. This can be illustrated in particularly by fear. Fear is not a moral category, but it can stand between us and God, and thus hinder love and life. Since our attempts to cope with our enhanced life with unsuitable means, sins are a kind of misleading packaging. They make a promise that they can't keep. Although our sin is a reaction to other people's guilt, we have chosen it. We cling stubbornly to it and are responsible for it. So long as we blame others and don't take responsibilities for our own lives, the separation can't be overcome. We remain trapped. With each of us, there is a key dilemma, a main root of evil, a favorite vice. It colors and flavors all areas of our lives. This one pitfall is so present in our lives that we ourselves do not recognize it. We were always this way. That's why we have to try to catch it on the run, so to speak. As a rule, it's a great aha experience. At the stroke, it becomes clear why I have done everything that I've done. I see that I had the same behavior models in place even as a little child. It's the crimson thread that runs through my life. It explains everything: why I choose certain friends, why I played a certain sport, why I didn't, and so on. Our sin and our unredeemed perceptions of the world are paradoxically the methods that helps us get to our divine force. When we commit our favorite sin, we are, so to speak, fully there. That is why we can't simply give it up. It belongs to the specific way that we give our life and goal and a direction. It belongs to the survival strategy that we adopted as children. We're all creators of habit. We keep retreating back to where we feel at home. That is why we will fund our gifts where our sin is. Why in our encounter with life do we human beings so often keep running up against ourselves instead of making a breakthrough to God, to the total other? In our present day, egocentric society, we are especially inclined to remain stuck in our own thoughts or feelings. For this reason, for many Westerns, unless they have dismissed God completely, God today is nothing more than a projected image of themselves, a God that we desire, fear, or culturally need. The encounter with the total other, which the not I, does not take place for most people. The old masters and spiritual guides wanted people to acknowledge their blockage and prejudices, or their mode of perception, that is, their habitual way of viewing and shaping life from an egocentric viewpoint. In the Middle Ages, such compulsions were called passions. Unrecognized passions allow me to mistake my limited perspective for the whole. The task is to overcome these passions and to learn to perceive reality more objectively. We have to press through the God, the totally objective, who for Christians is at the same time totally ours, since he has committed himself to our world and become part of it. We must be capable of meeting someone other than ourselves. The darkness is a part of us. I have a rule of thumb that says that those who believe they are holy aren't. Jesus said that the prostitutes, the tax collectors, and the sinners will enter the reign of God rather than those who sit before him in the synagogue. When Jesus healed sick people, he always said, "Your faith has made you whole." He never said, "Your correct doctrine, your orthodoxy, your dogmatic have healed you." I too hope, of course, that I'm acting correctly, but I can't continually circle around this question. The problem is precisely in the need to be right and the need to think of myself as right. That is the problem for the soul. I have to do my work and leave the judgment to God. I need to avoid the compulsion to constantly pass judgment, because those who constantly pass judgment are not in a position to honestly perceive their own reality. Naturally, we have to learn to distinguish between darkness and light, but we dare not succumb to the illusion that we ourselves don't have a share in the darkness. The darkness we see is always a part of us. We can't naively skip over the subject of darkness and light. And it's precisely because we were so naive that we so often became victims of dark powers and called them light. More than with any other personality trait in my life, all or nothing thinking has caused me to make huge mistakes and bad judgments, hurt people and myself, withhold love, and misinterpreted situations. And this pattern of dualistic or polarity thinking is deeply entrenched in most Western people, despite its severe limitations. Binary thinking is not wrong or bad in itself. In fact, it is necessary in most situations, but it is completely inadequate for the major questions and dilemmas of life. Why do we do this to ourselves and one another? Don't I know that every viewpoint is a view from a point? Why can't I stand back and observe that I always have a preference or bias or need, perhaps even a good and helpful one? Don't I know by now that some of the information is never all of the information? What is it that makes it so hard to backtrack from my position once I've declared it in my mind, and especially if I declare it publicly? The ability to stand back and calmly observe my inner dramas without rushing to judgment is foundational for spiritual seeing. It is a primary form of dying to self that Jesus lived personally and was the most beautiful example for our lives as of today. The growing consensus is that, whatever you call it, such calm, egoless seeing is invariably characteristic of people at the highest levels of doing and loving in all cultures and religions. They are the ones who call sages or wise women or holy men. They see like the mystics see. So, I know it's a lot. But this is not just we read it through. I want to end with this: you have to live it through. And take that part of yourself where you see that it's most needed to work on. As we really want to see with spiritual eyes, then we need to face the truth about our own lives and not using our eyes to look always to others. It's a reflection. But what do you see when you look in the mirror? You see yourself. What you see when you don't look in the mirror? You look to others. Let the Holy Spirit be your mirror as your inner soul can receive that transformation. May God bless you, and may the Spirit guide you in education as you receive it. May God bless you, and may the peace of God be with you and stay with you. Bye-bye, and have a wonderful day wherever in your time frame you are. Enjoy life. Bye.